It is the night of August 14, 1943, and the streets of Calcutta lie eerily quiet, the air heavy with the smell of decay and the distant clank of idle cargo ships bobbing in the harbor. Why do these vessels, capable of hauling grain, sit idle while millions of people starve? The answer unfurls in a tangled web of wartime logistics, imperial policy, and a desperate scramble for steel that turned a regional shortage into one of the 20th century's deadliest famines. The story begins in early 1942, when the Japanese Navy surged through Southeast Asia, capturing Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, and threatening the Indian Ocean. Britain's war efforts suddenly depended on a fragile lifeline of merchant vessels that could ferry food, fuel, and troops across seas now prowled by submarines. The Ministry of War Transport in London, charged with allocating every ton of shipping, faced a stark calculus: every ship sent to the Mediterranean to support the North African campaign meant one fewer ton for the far-flung colonies of the empire. In Bengal, the 1942 harvest had already been cut short by a severe monsoon failure. Local markets, already strained, relied heavily on rice imports from Burma, a province that had become a front line. When Japanese forces cut the Burma Road in early 1942, the overland flow of rice stopped. The British administration in India, led by the Viceroy, turned to sea transport as the only remaining artery. Yet the Admiralty, wary that a Japanese fleet might intercept a convoy, ordered that larger ships, those over about 5,000 tons, be prioritized for Atlantic routes to protect convoys bound for Britain. Smaller coastal vessels, many aging and poorly maintained, were left to ply the Bay of Bengal, but they could not match the capacity of the larger freighters. The next beat brings us to the market distortions that followed. In mid-1942, the colonial government introduced a price ceiling on rice in India, intended to curb speculation and keep food affordable. Historians note that the ceiling, combined with wartime procurement pressures, discouraged private traders from moving grain at all. Merchants who had once hauled rice from Calcutta to the interior now faced bureaucratic hurdles and the threat of fines for transporting grain beyond prescribed limits. The result was a chilling freeze in the market. Rice sat in warehouses while the countryside grew thinner. Compounding the shortage, a devastating cyclone struck the coastal delta in March 1943, destroying much of the modest stores of grain that had survived the monsoon failure. Fishermen lost boats, salt and oil supplies vanished, and the already scarce food supplies were further eroded. District officials recorded queues that stretched for blocks, mothers clutching empty hands, and children coughing from malnutrition. At the same time, official telegrams sent to London reported that normal distribution continues, a phrasing that contemporary scholars interpret as a deliberate understatement designed to keep the war narrative focused on the front lines rather than colonial crises. The discrepancy between local observations and official reports highlights the political sensitivity surrounding famine reporting during wartime. Around the middle of the narrative, the picture of shipping allocations becomes clearer. Shipping space in the Indian Ocean was managed through the existing convoy system and the joint British-American shipping committees that oversaw tonnage distribution for the entire war effort. Records from the National Archives show that, in the quarter ending June 1943, roughly 1.2 million tons of cargo capacity passed through the Indian Ocean. Of that, estimates suggest that only a fraction, perhaps around 150,000 tons, was earmarked for civilian food relief in India. The overwhelming majority was assigned to ammunition, tanks, raw materials, and other military necessities destined for the European and Pacific theaters. No formal bilateral pact specifically excluding colonial food shipments has been documented. Rather, the allocations emerged from the broader prioritization of military cargo within the existing shipping committees. The human cost of these decisions becomes stark in the fourth beat. Contemporary estimates place the death toll from the Bengal famine of 1943 to 44 between 2 and 3 million people, a figure that rivals the scale of many other 20th century catastrophes. Newspaper clippings from the period describe entire villages abandoned, fields left unharvested because labourers were too weak to work, and a wave of cholera that followed the famine's grip. Shipping manifests from July 1943 record that 3 large cargo ships loaded with wheat and flour arrived at Bombay, only to be redirected to the Middle East after a last-minute order from the Admiralty prioritizing military shipments. Captains of those vessels later testified that they had been instructed to give precedence to military exigencies over colonial welfare. A turning point arrives with the publication of a British Parliamentary Committee on India report in late 1944. The committee, after examining the famine, concluded that the shortage of food grains was aggravated, if not caused, by the prioritization of shipping resources for the war effort and by administrative decisions that restricted the internal movement of food. This acknowledgement forces a re-examination of earlier narratives that blamed the disaster solely on natural causes and the Japanese blockade. The final beat looks beyond the war years to the lingering aftermath. After 1945, the British government established the Bengal Famine Relief Commission, which organized imports of grain from Australia and the United States. Relief shipments began arriving in early 1946, but for many the aid came too late. Survivors bore physical scars, stunted growth, chronic illness, and psychological wounds that would shape Indian politics for decades. The famine became a rallying point for independence leaders, who argued that British imperial policy had sacrificed Indian lives for a distant war. Historians continue to debate the extent to which shipping allocations could have been altered without jeopardizing the broader Allied victory. Some argue that a modest rerouting of even a few 100,000 tons might have saved millions, while others contend that the logistical constraints and submarine threats made such a diversion virtually impossible. The story ends not with a tidy conclusion but with a lingering question that still haunts scholars: if the Allies had chosen to protect a cargo of rice rather than a convoy of tanks, would the course of the war have changed, and would Bengal have been spared the horror of 1943? The empty docks of Calcutta stand as a silent reminder that decisions made in boardrooms far away can echo in the lives of ordinary people, turning a supply chain into a death sentence. The camera pans over the rusted hull still moored in the harbor, the water reflecting a sky that has witnessed both triumph and tragedy. The unanswered question hangs in the salty air, waiting for a new generation to weigh the cost of wartime priorities against the value of human life.